I'm Tom Turk, Dean of the George L. Arduous School of Business and Economics, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the 43rd Annual Chapman Economic Forecast. In particular, I'd like to welcome our numerous board members, alumni, business partners, students, and parents watching this conference today. There are a lot of forecasts out there, but nobody cares about them. This is the real one. And thank you to all our sponsors, our title sponsor, Bank of America, our U.S. segment sponsor, Edwards Life Sciences, our gold sponsors, Julia and George Arduous, C&L Refrigeration, Christine and Bradley Comp, Maribel and Sebastian P. Musco, and our silver sponsor, Schools First Federal Credit Union. Our bronze sponsors, First American, Orco Block Company, and Whittier Trust. And finally, our media sponsors, the Orange County Business Journal and Orange County Register. With the help of our sponsors and guests, the Economic Forecast has raised over $4.8 million over the years in scholarships. To learn more about our sponsors and campus partners, be sure to click on our exhibitor booth. This last academic year was a time of accelerating success for the Arduous School. We added nationally known faculty, increased our graduate enrollments over 30%, hosted the 43rd President of the United States, opened our new data analytics accelerators, welcomed our first 10 Arduous scholars into our graduate programs, and launched our new Masters in Real Estate. With the help of Alex Hayden and the rest of our founding board, we've designed a program that's featured over 20 guest speakers in the first semester alone, and it prepares students with the skills, experience, and connections they need to accelerate their careers in real estate. A special thanks to our founding board for making this transformational opportunity possible for our students. With all this going on, it's not surprising that Poets and Quants has featured us as one of the fastest rising business schools in the United States. U.S. News and World Report now ranks us 74th in the nation and 3rd among all private schools on the West Coast. And the last Bloomberg Business Week rankings placed our undergraduate programs 34th in the country and number 1 in California, ahead of USC. But what about the economy? When we met in June, we thought the lockdowns would be a thing of the past by now. How will the economy weather the new wave? What about the stock market, real estate activity, and interest rates? The obvious place to go for an answer to these questions is our own President Emeritus, Dr. Jim Doty, who will be joined by Professor Fidel Lawandi, Director of the Hoag Center for Real Estate and Finance. Be sure to stay on after the conference for a question and answer session. You can submit a question by clicking on Ask a Question at any time. But before we get started, I'd like to thank our title sponsor, Bank of America.
The racial and economic disparities that have long existed in this country have only been widened by the coronavirus and amplified by the most recent acts of injustice. People around the world are coming together with greater urgency to demand action. At Bank of America, we know we all have a role to play to overcome the very real consequences of systemic racism and inequity. This includes individuals, governments, nonprofits, and the private sector. Racial equality and economic opportunity are deeply connected. That's why Bank of America has committed $1 billion over 4 years to address critical gaps in affordable housing, access to healthcare, employment and job skills, and the resources small businesses need to succeed. We can do more, and we need to do more now to further advance racial equality and economic opportunity for all.
Please join me in welcoming Alan Staff, Market President, Orange County, and Region Executive, Commercial Real Estate Banking for Bank of America. Alan has 30 years of experience with Bank of America's Commercial Real Estate Banking Group, which delivers full banking services to real estate clients located in the Central and West regions. He has his BSBA from Drake University, an MBA from Loyola of Chicago, and is a beloved member of the Arduous School Board of Counselors. And now it's with great pleasure I introduce to you Market President and Region Executive, Alan Staff.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to all of our friends at Chapman for their commitment to the annual economic forecast. While 2020 has been a year of the unexpected, it's also been a year of inspiration for all of us to rise up and face difficult challenges. And it's the business community's choice to approach those challenges as opportunities to improve, collaborate, and innovate like never before. We highlighted in our video the tremendous impacts of the global health crisis, and it's brought many issues to the forefront of the collective conversation. and we have an opportunity to make lasting, positive change. To quote our CEO, capitalism can solve these problems, and if we don't aim capitalism at them, they are not going to get solved. While we cannot guarantee everyone will have the same outcomes, we can and we should do our best to ensure that everyone has the same opportunities to work and to thrive. This is the time to build on our efforts, and this is the time to do more. Our video referenced our new commitment of $1 billion, focusing on addressing critical gaps in affordable housing, access to health care, employment and job skills, and the resources small businesses need to succeed. This year in Orange County, we invested over $2 million to address the crisis and to expand economic mobility opportunities for those who need it most. We've also provided more than 300,000 masks and over 200 gallons of hand sanitizer to essential workers in Orange County. We're also delivering for our communities through new product innovation. Last month, we announced a new financing product, allowing customers to take out emergency loans up to $500 for just a $5 flat fee. Customers can access the money immediately through their phones, and they have 90 days to pay it back with no interest. At Bank of America, we understand that our success is a reflection of our community's strength. And so we will continue to innovate and deliver in ways that build a strong Orange County. In that vein, for over 40 years, we've partnered with Chapman, which is an institutional model for innovation and building stronger communities for everyone. Recently, Chapman announced its Diversity and Inclusion Research, Scholarship, and Creative Activity Initiative, where individuals can apply for up to $15,000 for research or a creative project that serves diverse communities. Chapman understands that diversity and inclusion are key to enhancing innovation in Orange County. Now, I'd like to introduce my friend, Dr. Jim Doty, to dive into the forecast and what's in store in 2021. Take it away, Jim.
Well, welcome everyone. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Alan, for the great leadership you've given Bank of America and for sticking with us for so many years as our title sponsor. We really appreciate it, as we do the support from all of our sponsors. I can't begin without also thanking Aaron Lastinger for having the generosity through the Anderson Foundation in putting her dad's namehead on top of the Center for Economic Research. So with that, let's get into it. This is the 43rd annual forecast. 43 years ago, George Argyris gently coerced me over at the Floor corporate headquarters to give our first annual forecast conference. That was back in 1978 when I was a young and spry 32 years old. And here we are 43 years later, presenting our second virtual forecast. Hopefully our update in June, COVID will be behind us and it'll be a new world and we'll be back in person, hopefully on the Musco stage. We'll start with our forecast accuracy, and in this I want to show you from 9 to 2019, we did a really good job at the center in terms of forecasting the most important variable at the national level, real GDP, total spending, aggregate spending. Well, here we are last December when we presented our forecast at the 42nd forecast conference. We forecasted that there would be a mild decrease in GDP growth, falling just below 2%. In fact, we were among the more pessimistic of the forecasters out there. Well, as we all know, this was pre-COVID. COVID hits, and it looks now like real GDP for 2020 on average will be decreasing about 3%, as you can see. So this is the widest deviation we've ever had in our forecast accuracy between what we forecasted and what actually occurred. Thankfully, the update forecast, we recovered. Back in June, we were in the second quarter, but we didn't have second quarter real GDP data. So we're kind of flying blind. And if you recall those early days of COVID, many, and I would say most forecasters were very, very pessimistic. Remember the U-shaped recovery? Nothing's going to happen for a year or 2 years. Who knows how long? This is going to be a devastating recession, even worse than the Great Recession. We didn't buy it, and I'll explain why later, but we didn't buy it. We forecasted that, first of all, we were very close to the second quarter. We didn't have these data in the second quarter. The 35% compounded annual drop in real GDP in quarter two. But most importantly, we forecasted recovery, as shown in gray here, and it wasn't even as strong as the recovery turned out to be. The recovery, the pickup, the third quarter recovery was even faster than what we had forecasted, and we were among the most certainly optimistic of the forecasters out there. And I'll explain later why we were as optimistic as we were, because it relates to what we think is going to be happening in 2021. When you take a longer time pattern, maybe to get away from that December miscall that we made as a result of not anticipating the economic effects of COVID, certainly pre-COVID when we met in December of 2019. But to take a longer run perspective, real GDP, last year in December, we were tied with UCLA, number one in forecast accuracy. And this year, I'm pleased to say that we are alone in the number one position, comparing ourselves against 22 other forecasts in the blue chip indicator forecast. If you look at four variables, in addition to real GDP, three other important variables at the national level, we fell. We fell from number one to number two. Northern Trust displaced us, but I'm very pleased that in the top 10, we're the only forecast coming from an educational institution that made it number two. So that ain't bad. I'm going to start, this relates to forecast accuracy, and I'm going to begin with the runner-up award for the best Newsom exaggeration. A couple of years ago, you may remember at the forecast, I talked about Governor Newsom's tendency for hyperbole. He talked about the need, and he established a goal for building 500 new housing units in California each year from back then, 2017 to 2025, 500,000. Preposterous forecast. We're lucky we can build 100,000, but that was his forecast. Well, his tendency to hyperbole hasn't changed. So the best Newsom exaggeration, this is a runner-up. I'm going to get you to the top award in just a second. But this is where, back at the update, I had this slide. California faces a staggering $54 billion budget deficit due to the economic devastation from the coronavirus. Okay. First of all, when we looked into it, as I explained back in June, this is 54 billion includes 2 years of deficits, not just one. So that's one exaggeration, but it's more than that. This is the same slide I presented back in June, and this is where Newsom is talking about a deficit. He stated that for 1 year, expenses would be $153 billion. Revenues are coming in projected at $125. And that difference, as you do the math, is around $30 billion. So $30 billion of the 54, that's the 1 year deficit for the current fiscal year that we're in. Back in June, we stated it's not going to be anywhere near that. We forecasted that expenses would be 12.6 billion lower, and revenues, because we forecasted more so than anyone else, we were much more optimistic about the recovery. It turned out to be not even as optimistic as it was in actuality. But we forecasted $16 billion more in revenue. Now, when you take those two together, we said that we're going to essentially have a balanced budget. this year as a result of a turnaround of 12.6, 15.9. Do the math now. That's 16 plus they're around $28 billion turnaround. Okay, this just came out about 2 or 3 weeks ago from the Legislative Analyst's Office, Gabriel Patek. This is an article. Notice that he's saying as a result of the government, the economy doing better than we thought, there's going to be a one-time $26 billion windfall. Well, that $26 billion, the windfall we forecasted back in the update was 28. So we're pretty close. And who knows, maybe we're going to be even closer than this 26. And it's the result of the state overestimating the $54 billion budget. So essentially this year we're going to have a balanced budget in the state as a result of this turnaround. Now for the best Newsom exaggeration this year, a classic example of hyperbole. This can't come from his facts, not fear. Talked about, we project, this was early in the early weeks of COVID, when COVID was beginning to hit back in March. We project that roughly 56% of our population, 25.5 million people, will be infected with the virus. You know, there are 40 million people around in the population of California. This is more than half would get COVID. Now, I underestimated the impact of COVID in the early days. So I was underestimating. But to say that it was going to be 25.5 million in 8 weeks, if you count all of the infections in California through yesterday, it's roughly 1.4 million. 1.4 million, not 25.5 million in an 8-week period. When he was called on this doesn't seem right. This seems to be way higher than what's going to happen. A few weeks later, he issued, we want to manipulate, like this, we want to manipulate this number down. That's what this order is all about. I guess he can claim credit then. Instead of 25.5, we brought it down to the 1.4 million that we have most recently. Now I'd like to talk about the best. I'm showing you this. I just got this a few weeks ago. Best excuse to get out of this. This is a midterm exam. This one I love. But I have to preface it by saying it's because this semester teaching statistics, business statistics via Zoom. So it's a virtual class. So they did back in the spring in econometrics. By the way, parents are out there, at least for stats. I really believe that teaching this through Zoom or through video for what I'm doing using software programs and Excel a whole lot, that it works even better than a 3-hour normal lecture. But this one relates to the Zoom nature of the class. So here's the best excuse. Hey, Professor Doty, that's exactly how she wrote it. I was wondering if we were still having the midterm today. I know it was scheduled for today, but I know with the election still going on that many people have not really been able to study. Is there a chance that it will be moved? Sorry to say that mean old Doty did not change the exam date. Okay, Trump or Biden. This is the final comparison of forecast accuracy. You may recall that we have a model that's been right 15 out of the last 16 elections and calling the victor in terms of the electoral vote, the popular vote, not the electoral vote. This is the actual result of how the margin of victory on the part of the incumbent party candidate. So, for example, back in '56, Dwight Eisenhower beat Adlai Stevenson by a margin of 16%. And so you have these margins through the years. And here was our forecast that comes out of an equation that's based almost exclusively on economic variables, especially job growth. That's very important. So you plug in what we forecast into this equation that we've developed historically, and it's called 15 of the last 16 elections. The only error was this minor error here in 60. We call for this is a very small margin of victory for Nixon. Turned out to be a small margin of victory for Kennedy. But what did we forecast back at the update forecast? We forecasted a big loss for the incumbent party, namely Donald Trump and the Republicans. Let's take a magnification of that period and see exactly what happened. Here's the actual margin of vote victory for the incumbent party for 8, 12, and 16. There's our forecast. Now, for the update, we forecasted that the incumbent party would lose in its popular vote by 9.8%. Remember I mentioned that the economy was even stronger than our very optimistic forecast. It was even stronger than that. When you put in those more optimistic actual figures, it turns out the model would have predicted a loss of 7.3% on the part of the Trump candidacy, the incumbent party. This is simply because when you plug in the equation, the more realistic numbers would have produced 7.3%. And it looks now like the final vote will be around a 4% margin of victory in the electoral vote for Joe Biden. So the difference here between the model and the actual vote is about 3.3%, which is about the widest margin, error margin we've ever had in the 17 elections. And you can see the differences have been a little wider than they have been in the past. And I think that may be because there's a working theory that voters are more polarized. So even though the economy was weak this year, you're not blaming it. Maybe they're not blaming it because it's a COVID recession. It's not because of what's going on in terms of administrative leadership. I think it's more the fact that Democrats will tend to vote more Democratic, and for a Democratic candidate, no matter what's going on with the economy, and the same thing on the Republican side. Well, I shouldn't say no matter what, but will be more inclined to vote for along party lines than they were in the past. The nice thing is that the model will pick this up over time and will become more accurate over time. Although, as I leave this graph, I have to say that I'm very pleased that for this most recent election, that's now 16 out of 17 of the last elections were called correctly in terms of popular vote on the part of this strictly economic forecasting model. Okay, the best Trump tweet. I'm going to miss these. Well, maybe not. I think he'll be tweeting anyway. But this one is this very contagious virus. It's incredible, but it's something we have tremendous control over. Well, first of all, that may be a bit of an exaggeration in terms of the control. But I love this tweet because of his use of the word tremendous. If you notice that in just about any speech, almost like every other sentence, he'll throw a tremendous in there. I often thought, wouldn't it be funny to do an economic forecast, an impersonation of Trump doing an economic forecast, and it would be something like, well, our forecasting accuracy was tremendous. Housing prices are going to be tremendous. Whatever is going to be, and especially the presidential leadership will be tremendous. Well, with that said, I hope you will enjoy now our U.S. Orange County and California forecast, which I personally believe you're going to find very tremendous. Okay, cumulative change in real GDP. Here's the V-shaped recovery. It's comparing what happened this year with the Great Recession, and it's clear that while the COVID recession was much deeper, much sharper than anything that happened during the Great Recession of 2007 to 9. The recovery of the recession is much stronger than anything we had during the Great Recession. And now we're going to evaluate what happens after quarter 3 when we get into the actual forecast. Many people argue that this very strong pickup in the third quarter is because housing picked up so sharply at the national level. And it's true, housing did. But let's put that housing recovery into perspective. If you take the third quarter increase in real GDP and put it in dollar terms, the turnaround was $1.3 trillion. That was the increase over the first quarter. Over the second quarter. Of that 1.3 trillion, only 65 billion of it was increase in housing permit valuation. The real rebound was on the consumer spending side, 1.1 trillion. That's the big gorilla in the room. That's what you need to keep your eye on to determine what's going to happen in 2021. Well, remember I mentioned that we were among the more optimistic in terms of our forecasts. And the reason for that optimism back in the update and our forecast of a V-shaped recovery, which wasn't even as strong as what happened, was because we felt that aggressive fiscal and monetary policy would rule the day. And with that kind of stimulus on the part of both the monetary side and the fiscal side, there's going to be a big recovery. Just on the fiscal side, the federal debt increased $4.1 trillion, and about $2 trillion of that was the CARES Act 1. Implicit in our forecast for next year, we are assuming that the deficit by next January, by next month, will be $1.5 trillion. About $1 trillion of that will be a CARES Act 2. So we are continuing to see fiscal stimulus. If this doesn't happen, the actual results will be less optimistic than the picture that I'm going to paint for you here in the next few minutes. Another reason for optimism on the consumer spending side, remember consumer spending is about 2/3, even more than 2/3 of overall GDP, is the fact that the wealth effect, which is fueled by people's wealth, net household assets, principally the equity and the value of a person's or family units, a household's home, and secondly, the stock market, 401ks mainly. And when you look at what's happened during the last half of this year, stock market has been very strong recovery. Housing prices have been going through the roof. No pun intended there, but when you take it all together, you have an almost 10% increase in wealth in the during 1 year. Very, very sharp increase. And that wealth effect will fuel a strong turnaround in consumer spending, especially when people are allowed to spend when we enter a post-COVID world, not a post-COVID world, hopefully soon in 2021. The other thing is that there's dry powder, the part of consumers, with unemployment compensation and income and so on, not the wealth effect, but in terms of the savings, what they're not spending out of their income has increased so sharply. Here in the second quarter, when the economy was shut down, savings rate went up 4.7% increase. On top of that, another 2.8% in the third quarter. That's pent-up demand is building, is beginning, and that pent-up demand, once consumers are allowed to spend, will be translated into much higher consumer spending, and that will fuel a sharp turnaround in real GDP growth. You can see that here in real GDP. 2020, the drop was minus 3.1%. We forecasted, again, we were optimistic at -5. Turns out it was even stronger. This was the difference, by the way, in the why the model for the election changed from around 10% to 7% was because the economy was doing better than what we even forecasted in July. In 21, we are very optimistic. We're talking about a 5.7% increase in real GDP. Several assumptions here. Number one, as I just pointed out, another fiscal stimulus. Ultimately, there will be another $1 trillion CARES Act 2. And secondly, with a vaccine by late spring, early summer. We're hopeful this COVID disaster tragedy will be increasingly become a memory and will be behind us. And when that happens, when the economy opens up and people can spend on travel again, and people can spend on consumer goods, on leisure and hospitality, restaurants, bars, there's going to be a sharp increase in spending. I might point out, by the way, I'm not a futurist, so I can't really talk about, how will the overall economy be transformed as a result of this last year of COVID. I like to use the analogy of World War II. During World War II is a similar period, longer period, 4 years of pent-up demand. No automobiles were, people don't realize, no private automobiles were produced during that period because those companies were building airplanes and Jeeps. So people couldn't consume major appliances, automobiles, and so on. So there's pent-up demand. When the war ended in 1945, huge increase in demand. Not going to be as big this time, but in addition to the impact on spending, think of how the structure of society, the economy changed. Before World War II, the proportion of women in the workplace was very low. After World War II, it became a standard, accepted. There's a quantum increase in women working. I think there's going to be structural changes taking place now. More, certainly in higher education and education, more virtual learning, fewer meetings where people are traveling, Zoom will continue. How much that will continue, I don't know. With remote learning, in addition, working outside of the office, at home, that will continue, and will have enormous effects in the economy. I'm not, like I said before, I'm not a futurist. This is difficult to say, but I think there have been some transformational changes that will be happening and we'll be able to measure, engage, and assess in the future as we go on. When you take that 5% increase in real GDP that we're forecasting, what does that mean in terms of cumulative change? Here's the big drop in the second quarter. Here's our third quarter V-shaped recovery. It's going to continue on a slower rate, and then through the fourth quarter of 21, it's approaching 4%, and that means that by the end of next year, 2021, we believe that overall spending will be almost 4% higher than it was in the pre-COVID levels. So even though we're essentially returning to where we were, as I said, I really believe the economy will be transformed structurally as a result of what we've been forced to do and change as a result of the mandates and the restrictions in terms of normal, everyday economic activity. What about the stock market? Well, those of you who've been following our forecast over the years, you know that I really like looking at the S&P 500 EP ratio, earnings over price. The fact that it's around 3% now simply means that if you buy in the stock market, S&P 500, randomly, your return on that investment will be about 3% in terms of either dividends and reinvested profits. That will be the return by being, a shareholder, 3%. Well, alternatively, if you decide, I don't want that risk, I'd rather buy a 10-year T-bond, the return is closer to, not even, but closer to 1%. I like to look at the difference between these two to gauge how strong the fundamental stock market position is. Before I leave that, I just want to say, if you buy that 10-year bond at 1%, because you think, well, at least I get 1%, it's safe and secure. It's not safe and secure. I think Jamie Dimon of Morgan Chase recently said, I wouldn't touch a bond with a 10-foot poll. And I absolutely agree with them, because remember, in the future, if interest rates go up, if this turnaround we're talking about, 5% increase in GDP, increase in spending, more fiscal stimulus, more monetary stimulus, that ultimately is likely to lead to inflation down the road. Inflation means higher interest rates. As interest rates go up, the capital value of that bond will drop. There's an article in the Economic and Business Review that gets into that in more detail. It's right in the back of the forecast. I urge you to look at that. The difference between stock market returns and that 10-year is given here. It's dropped somewhat since the COVID period when the market dropped. As a result, the EP ratio went way up. It's been dropping, but now it's still, the difference is still about 2%, a 200 basis point difference between investing in the market versus safe and secure fixed income instruments. I like that spread of 200 basis points. I wouldn't get worried until that spread really gets closer to zero. And until then, I'm happily fully invested in the stock market in my own 401k. But now to listen to a real expert in this, who is in our finance department, heads up our Bloomberg terminals and our James Financial Center at Chapman University in our Arger School of Business. My colleague, who's not only going to get into a little more detail on the market, but also talk about what are the implications of a Democratic president in the White House and the stock market. We've done some interesting historical analysis that he's going to report to you. So here he is, Fidel Lawande.
Thank you, Jim. And to Bank of America and our other sponsors, thank you so much for your continued support. Ladies and gentlemen, we welcome you and thank you for joining us today at our 43rd Economic Forecast. If you recollect on our last mid-year economic update, we shared with you that we see that the market is going to be volatile for the most part, and on the long run, though, we're going to have an upward trend. And in fact, that's what we saw. We saw that on the short term, we saw quite a bit of volatility. We had a few months where we actually had a good, healthy declines in June, September, and October. And in these months, it offered us the opportunity to kind of deploy some of our dry powder, some of our cash to acquire some quality companies. On the long run, though, as we had predicted, the market continued to grow. From June, when we last met, until the end of November, we ended up at about a little under 20%. And even when you look from January with the dip in March until the end of November, we're around 12.6%. We also had shared with you that we anticipated a potential for a market decline or adjustment had we seen a Democratic sweep. Of course, we didn't see the blue wave that was anticipated, and as a result, that correction really never happened. What's interesting is on the very next day after the elections, we saw that in the early hours of the trading, the market actually spiked up about 4.5%, as those that were betting on a market decline attempted to close their short positions. And despite the fact that we know that the performance in November, for the most part, was driven by the vaccine news, we believe that there's a portion of that return, a significant portion of that return in November, that actually was the result of the people that were shorting the market or anticipating that decline to push through and kind of close those positions. Now, since the elections, Jim and I have been getting, one of the most common questions that we've been getting is, well, now that Biden is going to be president, what are we going to see as it relates to the market performance? And from that perspective, our answer is always the same. If we're just looking at who the president is and what party the president belongs to, the answer is it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter who's in the White House specifically as it relates to market activities and market performance. What drives market performance is the overall balance between the White House and Congress. So if we look at historical numbers as it relates to who's in the White House and the market performance, we see on the first year of their in office, it's a mixed basket for the most part. Even when we look at their entire tenure in the White House, we see for the most part, it's a mixed basket. Now, in George W. Bush's situation, his tenure was a little bit different because of the fact that he started off with the dot-com bust September 11th and wrapped it up with the housing bubble bust. So when you adjust for that, overall, the numbers are kind of mixed. What we look for is the combination between the White House and Congress. Why do we do that? The markets are a reflection of what the economy is expected to do. And the economy, from a fiscal policy perspective, is driven by what fiscal policies the government puts in place. And when we say the government, it's not just the White House or Congress, but the collaboration between the two parties. So when we look at it from that perspective, the picture gets clearer on the performance of the market as it relates to elections and who's in Congress and who's in the White House. Now, just so that we're all on the same page, when we're looking at this table, the R's are for Republicans, the D for Democrats, very easy to remember. And then the sequencing is that the first letter is going to be for the White House, the second letter is going to be for Senate, and the third letter is going to be for the House of Representatives. Now, as voters, our favorite mix is when we have a Republican in the White House and Congress is controlled by the Democratic Party. Since 1952, this has happened 32% of the time. Unfortunately, it's the lowest possible performance. We see that the performance on an annualized basis is around 4.32%. In contrast, when we have a Democrat in the White House and Congress is controlled by Republicans, we get the best performance on an annualized basis at 16.46% historically. Now, you ask, well, that doesn't really relate to what we're expecting because come January, we're either going to have Democrats in both the House and Congress, or we're going to have a mix of that. So when we turn our attention to what happened historically when it comes to having Democrat in the White House and Democrats in the Congress, and we look at that number, this has happened 25% of the time in the past, since 1952. And on average, we see an annualized return of almost 9%. So if we end up with a Democratic Senate and we have a Democrat House, a Democrat White House, and a Democratic Congress, then we're on average, if we hold true, we'll end up around 9%. Not too bad of a return given the circumstances that we're in. Now, in contrast, just so that we kind of get an idea, if we have a straight across the board Republicans, White House, Senate, and House of Representatives, historically this has happened 12% of the time, and we ended up with an annualized return of approximately 12.5%. So the preference would be to have a straight across the board Democrat Republicans, but that's not an option for us this year. We're looking at a possible straight across Democrats, and on average, that kind of gives us about a 9%, a little under 9% return. Now, when we look at, well, what are the other possibilities that we might be seeing? Interestingly enough, the market prefers a split Congress. So when we look at a split Congress, we have the option of a Republican in the White House, and then a split Congress where Senate is Republican and the House is Democrats. And we see that historically, that gave us a return of 13.9%. If we flip it and we have a White House and Senate of Democrats, and then the House of Representatives controlled by Republicans, we see that the return on an annualized basis is about 13.8%. So notice that from a market return perspective, it doesn't matter what the sequencing is, as long as the White House and Senate is controlled by the same party, then we're in good shape, and then the House of Representatives is controlled by the other party. And in both circumstances, the average return is around the 13.8, 13.9%. You see how close the average return is. So that's kind of what the market prefers. But the other option that we have is, what we're looking at is that we have a Democrat in the White House, Biden. The Senate stays Republican, and the House of Representatives, despite the fact that Republicans have gained more seats, the control stays in the Democratic hand. And in this situation, we've never had that happen before. So we don't know what kind of return we're going to have. We don't have a historical pattern that we could return to and say, okay, this is what we could expect given the historical performance. This closest to this mix that we've had was where we had George W. Bush in the White House, and then we had a Democratic Senate, and then the Republicans controlled the House of Representatives. And that only happened once for 2 years, the first term of George W. Bush's tenure, if you will, and that was a drop of 16% on an annualized basis during that time. But remember, that was the bubble bust. So, and it only happened once. So we don't really have a track record as it relates to what should we find, or what kind of returns should we see, at least based on historical data. So the biggest question is, well, where do we think the market is going to go in 2021? So we think for the first 6 months of the year, next year, that we're going to see the same as we saw in the last 6 months. We're going to continue to see volatility. We're going to continue to see some down months where we're just not seeing positive returns. But we believe that those down days or down months are going to be the nice periods where we could buy quality companies at attractive prices. So we're going to see the market dips, or we believe that the market dips are going to be a buying opportunity for us. On the long run, we believe that the market is going to continue to move upward, given the GDP and all the data that Jim presented to you. It only makes sense that we should continue to see the market continue to move at an upward trend. So short term, make sure that you know that you have a lot of volatility. You're going to have some down months, so any cash needs, make sure that you're taking that into account so that you don't get caught in the downturn. But if you're a long-term investor like us, then we're riding the upward trend. We're going to take advantage of the dips as buying opportunities, not selling opportunities. Now, you're wondering, well, what's going to happen in the second half of 2021? And for that, you're going to have to join us in June for the mid-year update. And with that, thank you very much, and I'll turn it to Jim to go over the California forecast.
Thank you, Fidel. Now we can move on to the California section of our forecast. And I begin with an analysis of job growth. Remember, at the state level, we do not have good gross state product figures, at least on a timely basis. So we focus on employment rather than aggregate spending. And for California, this is 2020, this year. You can see the big drop that happened in April, roughly minus 12%. And the recovery has been, at least on the employment side, not on the spending side, has been relatively weak. But through at least September, you can see the change. And even as late as September, we're still almost in the minus 10% range. I found this interesting. One reason that California suffered more than other states is because there's a relatively higher proportion of workers in the area of leisure and hospitality. If you look at Florida, here's Florida, which is growing around the same rate as California pre-COVID, but the drop of Florida was not as great as California, and it's actually widened the disparity. The margin of difference in growth rates is even wider in September. So why is Florida, which has more workers in leisure and hospitality than California, why is it doing better than California? We believe it's because the state of California is under more restrictive mandates. a part of controls in place to reduce the transmission and infection and death rate from COVID-19. To see that, we have put together at Chapman a mandate score. We took 7 different state governmental mandates together, compared them on a state-by-state basis, and we have found, this is from Chapman now, that Florida's mandate is minus 0.37. That is, it's less than the average mandates for all states, whereas California, much more stringent, 1.47 higher than the average score. Now, you might argue that, well, that's just 2 states. Could be an anomaly. Well, let's look at the 5 largest states in the union. And you can see that those 5 states were growing around the same rate. The margin of difference between these 5 states, very narrow pre-COVID. COVID hits, and the impact of COVID was much greater in some states than others, even though before that they were growing around the same rate. Well, if you look at those 5 states, the state that performed the highest level, Texas, had the fewest mandates as given by its minus 5.6 mandate score. Florida was next, which had the second least restrictive. And then as you get more and more restrictive, to the most restrictive of all, New York, you get 1.5. That means it's much greater than the average for all 50 states. Okay, we've gone now from Florida and California, now 5 states. Let's take all 50 states. And when you do that, you can see a very clear negative relationship. That is, the more mandates in a state, the greater the job loss, as shown here on that axis. At the center, we had to supplement our Chapman econometric model by looking at job growth prior to COVID, that is in February of this year to year. We had to look at the share of leisure and hospitality and this mandate score that we put together at Chapman to represent the mandates for all 50 states. When you do this, you can identify and more precisely measure the impact on jobs relating to this. You have to account for these 2 things. You have to hold these constant, which we did, in order to focus on the impact of mandates alone on jobs. And you can see that here in this next graph. California, we believe, as a result of the differences in mandates, the fact that California had more mandates on average than other states, it suffered 3% more in job losses, and not unlike New York and Illinois that had similar restrictions, and more job losses than Florida and Texas with fewer restrictions. This 3% in job loss represents 500,000 lost jobs. That's just the jobs. Doesn't count the lost businesses, the lost livelihoods, just in terms of lost jobs as a result of California being more stringent. 500,000 jobs, 500,000 workers, 3% of California's labor force. At the same time, the mandates had a positive impact in saving lives. And I believe our Center for Economic Research is the first research organization, certainly from an academic institution, that's been able to quantify very precisely the impact of mandates, stringency on lives saved. We've been able to do that by using what's called the Oxford Government Response Tracker. That's not from us, that's the Oxford University. But what we did at the center is to take this daily tracker that takes into account 11 different stringency measures that the states employed and come up with an average value. So the stringency index on average of this daily rate from March to July in California was 41.3 versus a statewide average of 35.6. California was 5.7 index points higher than the average during that period. Between July and December, California became even more stringent. more restrictive in terms of lockdowns and restrictions of various kinds, with an overall score of 56.5 versus a national average of all 50 states at 46.1, which led to a difference of roughly 10 points. Chapman has been able to use the Oxford score to then take these numbers and associate how states were in terms of restrictiveness into lives lost or lives saved. We have this for every measure. Since we're focusing on California here, we can see the numbers. January through July, we believe that California's greater restrictiveness saved 1,600 lives. 1,600 fewer lives were lost to COVID during that period. During the last 6 months or so, we've saved 5,000 lives for a total during the year of 6,600 lives. So what you have here is what is typical in economics, a benefit and a cost. The benefit is lives saved, greater restrictiveness. As you can see here, we've been able to save lives in California. And we have very, very compelling statistical evidence that supports these numbers, and we will be releasing these numbers. One of the studies from the center has already been published in the Social Science Research Network. It's one of the most number 3 downloaded articles in terms of health-related economic research, economic journals. In addition to that, we will be announcing each state's impact in terms of lives saved. But for now, focusing on California, the benefit was 6,600. The cost is what we've already talked about. 500,000 fewer jobs and the incomes associated with that, and the multiplier effect that pervades through the rest of the state economy. Lost businesses, lost livelihoods, you have that as a cost. As we move on and do more research in this area, we will begin to address and publicly announce at forums such as this what the benefit and cost numbers are associated with our COVID mandate policies. Okay, getting back to employment, you can see this is for California. The drop in total employment, a lot of that was because of the drop in leisure and hospitality. By the end of next year, we see leisure and hospitality recovering most of its losses, not to the same extent as total, but virtually so. That's what the post-COVID world will look like, given our assumptions. Payroll employment, California suffered more than the U.S., a drop of 7.1 versus 5.7, mainly because two things, leisure and hospitality, but also stricter COVID mandates. So we suffered more there. In 2021, we see a faster recovery as many of those leisure and hospitality jobs return to the fold, and because there are more returning to the fold in California, there will be more of an increase. Now I'm really, really excited about presenting to you the inaugural findings of a new indicator that, again, emanates, in this case, not just from Chapman, but from UCI. The team involves, I'm involved in it, Ken Murphy from UCI, formerly with Chapman as part of the team as Marshall Toplowski and Ramon Sphere, the director of our Center for Economic Research. This is financed, funded by the Orange County CEO Leadership Alliance, comprised of, I want to thank in particular Doug Wilson, the chair, and we're going to be hearing from Mike Masalam in a second. He's the chair of the advisory board, and the president, Mark Percy, who you may remember if you saw him after the update conference. He was one of my guests on Chapman Connects. This team here come together to put this innovation indicator together for 22 different innovation hubs around the country. I believe, I'm quite confident this is the most comprehensive, accurate measure in the nation relating to what's going on in this all-important innovation sector of the economy. To give you an idea how important it is, the Brookings Institution, they came up with what these industries are. They are comprised of your normal high-tech industries, but in addition to high-tech, it's a broader category that includes these sectors of the economy as well. What did we do with these sectors of the economy? Well, one of the things is we looked at wage rates, and you can see here, these are the 5 hubs that we're tracking now in California. We divided up what's normally thought of as the Silicon Valley into a northern part of the Silicon Valley and a northern part and a southern part, because we found that they're different, that they should be separate so we can measure the changes. In fact, the last couple of years, San Francisco has done great, and San Jose has been a basket case. So that's why we separated those out. But you also have these 3. Look at the average wages in innovation companies, innovation-defined companies. Even in Orange County, which has the lowest salary of all the 5 hubs, is virtually double the overall California average. What does this Chapman UCI Innovation Indicator, and I love that Chapman UCI because it's great to see educational institutions, 2 fine educational institutions coming together to collaborate in producing a measure that we hope will be very useful as a strategic guide in the kinds of policies and actions that we look at that will determine our county and our state's future. We look at not just jobs, but we look at the number of establishments, growth in those establishments, and the level of growth and the percentage growth. Same thing in jobs, level of growth, percentage growth, and also wages, percentage growth and level of growth. And we put those things together, and we've come up with first a rank of innovation hubs. Think of this as a balance sheet. This is 2018.1. If you take those measures in terms of magnitude, size, how big a hub is in innovation in terms of the number of establishments, the number of jobs, the salaries that are being paid. New York is number 1, and I have it here highlighted, the 5 California hubs. And we'll be presenting this in more detail in other presentations. There's a wealth of information. I'm going to just touch upon the high points here. This is where we stood in 2018, quarter 1, in terms of the aggregate size. But between 18 and 2020, up to the first quarter, pre-COVID, we can look at the Chapman UCI Innovation Indicator each quarter in terms of how it's changing. This is like an income statement each quarter. How well is it doing each quarter to see more of a dynamic? How will this change over time will very much depend on how well these innovation hubs are doing over time. We track the data in all of these series. Again, we have a data bank unlike anyone else. Well, if you could see San Francisco, which ranked 2, over the last 2 years, it's ranked 1 in terms of change. San Diego is another increasing California hub, going from 10 to a rank of 7 in terms of change. San Jose, remember I said a basket case over the last 2 years? You can see the sharp drop from 3 to 13. Los Angeles from 6 to 9, and Orange County from 13 to 18. This is not saying that this is the new rank. This is simply saying what's happened most recently, and then you can take those scores and incorporate them into a new rank of innovation hubs for 2020 quarter 1, when I'll be doing that in other presentations. But I want you to see, I'm focusing here on California. Remember, we're in the California part of this forecast. This is an average over a 2-year period. We can take each quarter between 2018.1 to 2020.1 and take where were we in each of those quarters, those 9 quarters, in terms of California. Where did California on average rank? And you'll see that right here. In 18.1, the indicator, the change, how many jobs we added, how many establishments we added, what happened to wages, not in terms of levels and in terms of percentage changes. Overall, we ranked 9. Taking those 5 together, Dividing it by 5, you get a rank of 9. We did pretty well in 18, California going up to a rank of 6. But then since then, 2019 was a tough year for California where it ranked 13. And that's why most of in terms of the actual balance sheet, California lost rank between 2018 and 2020. Well, that's going to bring us to Orange County, but before we get into that, I'd like to now segue to the most respected CEO, I believe, in Orange County, miracles he's done with Edwards Life Sciences, and also as a community leader. Example being the leadership role he's taken on in helping us develop this innovation indicator in terms of funding, but also in terms of helping us with the strategy as we've moved forward with this. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mike Mussallem, who will have more to say about innovation.
I'm Mike Mussallem, the Chairman and CEO of Edwards Life Sciences. On behalf of Edwards, we are proud to support the Chapman Economic Forecast. This year, more than ever, the forecast provides important insights. Clearly, COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on the county, state, nation, and world, particularly related to the economy. All of us at Edwards are proud to be invested and engaged members of this community. You may know Edwards is part of the critical healthcare infrastructure, so throughout 2020, our team never stopped. And I really thank our Edwards employees for their dedication to continuing to serve patients. I'm also proud that despite a challenging year, we could continue to grow our workforce globally, including adding innovation jobs right here in Orange County. And even though there are many examples of growth in Orange County, the team at Chapman reminds us that to make our county thrive into the future, we need to focus on attracting and growing innovation jobs. The current projection of Orange County is too dependent on tourism and retirement dollars, and that results in too many low-paying service jobs. Then we end up with a two-tier economy, rich and poor, and frankly, uninspiring prosperity. Instead, we need to start and grow companies in Orange County that require high-level talent. One idea is to focus on artificial intelligence to drive innovation across sectors. We know there's a lot of work to do, but we have the potential to be a world leader in this area and stimulate a local supercluster in AI. The resulting new innovation jobs generate both professional jobs and the demand for service sector jobs. This means greater social equity and prosperity for the county. I'm excited about this aspiration and the engagement with local partners to achieve it. Dr. Doty and the team at Chapman and UCI are remarkable partners, and they are developing measures of success to help us stay focused and grounded. I look forward to Dr. Doty's presentation where he will report on the Chapman UCI Innovation Indicator and its implications for our county's future. I'm personally confident in the future of Orange County due to the passion and engagement of many leaders and partners, including those that foster strong educational institutions at every level, the dedicated and generous philanthropic organizations, and the committed and strategic businesses. Thank you to Chapman for the insights and information presented today, and I continue to remain hopeful for the future and proud to be part of a strong OC community.
Thanks, Mike, and again, thanks for all you do for our community in leading the largest public company in Orange County. But, for example, being on chairing the advisory board and the CEO Leadership Alliance. You know, I can't begin to tell you how exciting it is for me and gratifying to see industry working closely with educational institutions in moving the curve, in making it possible to get a better insight in terms of fundamentally what is it that's going to improve Orange County's health, generate jobs in the innovation industry for graduates from our new Fowler School of Engineering, in our Swenson Hall of Engineering, and other STEM disciplines as well, not just at Chapman, but certainly Cal State Fullerton, UCI, other institutions. Worst thing that can happen in the community or an area is a brain drain. We want to retain and build jobs, and it's through the intercession of community leaders like Mike, Doug Wilson, Mark Percy, and others that they came to us and said, how can we get a better handle on how well we are doing in establishing these jobs? And in a second, I'm going to get into now what we're doing in Orange County. But before that, let's look at the general economic picture in jobs for Orange County. Orange County, the COVID effect was even greater negatively than California because Orange County has, and they're subject to the same, pretty much, the same mandates, stringency scores. The difference here is because Orange County has an even greater proportion in leisure and hospitality, tourist-related employment, than does California on average. You can see that here. Payroll employment in Orange County dropped 14.1% from the second quarter of 19 to the second quarter of 20. That's the depth, that's the height of the COVID crisis economically, was 14.1, several percentage points greater than any other county area. But we are optimistic about the future because just as COVID had a greater negative impact on the county, because we have a greater share in that very important sector of leisure and hospitality, we have more to recover from. And that's why we believe we will pretty much mirror where we are in California, even by the end of the year, maybe, perhaps, hopefully, a little faster growth for the county. Large part of that, because Orange County is so much dependent on the construction industry, is what's going on in the housing sector. This is a great measure that we have in Orange County, not Chapman, comes out from another reporting unit. The average days on the market to sell a home. That's a great measure of how much of a buyer's market it might be in housing or a seller's market. And you compare 2 years, 1 year to the other. As you can see, we were in a seller's market at the beginning of the year. It took fewer days to sell a home at the beginning of the year than it did the prior year. COVID hit, all hell breaks loose, and for a short period of time, it changed to a buyer's market because nobody was buying homes. There wasn't any building going on. Economic activity during the worst of the crisis was pretty much at a standstill without people buying homes. The number of homes available for sale built up, and you had this peak. Since then, with the recovery, we've had a return to a seller's market, fewer days strength here in the housing industry. But there are other variables as well. Housing is more affordable, mainly as a result of lower mortgage rates. And as a result, we see permits, which dropped sharply in 20 because of that chasm, that steep drop in the second quarter, dropped from 10,200 units to 6,220. But we see a recovery to 8,600, which is a big increase. Even though it's not going to return to 2019 levels, that's a 38, almost a 40% increase that we're anticipating in 21, fueling Orange County's economic recovery. Housing appreciation, we can see in 2020, almost 8%, mainly because mortgage rates were low, but there was no new supply coming on. Because of the drop in permit activity in the second quarter, the pipeline dried up and there was very little new housing being built. So the number of days to sell a home dropped, and so supply and demand, more demand, very little supply, prices increased. And this is not just Orange County. This is kind of a national phenomenon as well. In fact, the national rate of increase was almost as much as Orange County. Well, on top of that 7.8% increase, we expect in 2021 another 4.4% increase. So another strong year of appreciation. Again, mainly because mortgage rates are low and it's taking time for supply to come online in terms of new residential units. Also resales are also relatively scant supply right now. Interesting, though, that when you take these increases in housing prices, that's why when we go out to 21, housing affordability, which had been on the increase as mortgage rates dropped, now have plateaued, and we even see some drop back. Not so much because mortgage rates are increasing. We don't see decreases, but no increases. We don't see decreases, but more importantly, because housing prices are becoming much higher as a result of back-to-back strong appreciation years. You see housing affordability beginning to decline by the end of next year, which may suggest that 2022 will not be a strong year for housing, and perhaps a weak one, but stay tuned. We'll have more to say about that in 6 months when we're at the Update Conference. Total payroll employment comparing Orange County to California. You can see that pretty much California and Orange County were at parity. And 2020 Orange County dropped more because we're more of a tourist-related economy, metropolitan area, county, and in 2021, pretty much the same. California's growth will be pretty much the same as Orange County, but 2.6%. Now, what I'd like to mention here is that, COVID has gotten all of the attention because of the enormous impact that COVID has had on the economy. We tend to lose sight of structurally underneath COVID, what's going on? What's going to happen when COVID goes away? And it will go away. It may transform the economy in some ways, but we will, to a certain extent, return to normalcy and to the patterns that existed before COVID hit. And here's what is worrisome with respect to Orange County. Up and through the third quarter of 19, pretty much parity. But for 2 quarters, Orange County's job growth, pre-COVID, so this has nothing to do with COVID, dropped sharply. So while California was growing at around 1.3, 1.4%, Orange County was virtually just almost zero growth. Then if you look at the month before COVID hit, February of 19 to 20, and compare what was going on in Orange County versus other innovation hubs, other major metropolitan statistical areas, Orange County was growing about 0.5% lower than other counties. That bears and worthy and warrants more economic scrutiny. One of the problems, again, goes back to this now we have data that allows us to see what's going on in a industry, a very important industry that may be small in the proportion of jobs, but in terms of economic impact, much greater because of the value added. Remember the fact that wages are more than double, almost double what they are on average in California, just for Orange County. Okay, this is review. This is not new, but I'm focusing now on Orange County. Remember this balance sheet, 2018 one, I had the 5 counties. Now I'm just looking at Orange County. Same thing, this is what happened over the last 2 years in Orange County, and the fact that it dropped from 13 to 18. If you take that change, the fact that we were weaker over the last 2 years, that will bump Orange County from 13th in rank out of the 22 innovation hubs to number 14. That may not seem like much, but that's big because in 2 years to have that kind of a change in the balance sheet, in terms of overall size, is significant. And one of the reasons for that is that Denver, well, let's look at, just as we can look at what counties are not doing as well, we need to look at what counties are performing above par. So we can see what are some of the things they're doing that's generating growth in innovation jobs. A big increase, Phoenix ranks 19th, but in terms of change over the last 2 years, it ranked 3rd. Salt Lake City from 22, the smallest hub, ranked 5th. And if you take Denver, one from 16 in here. This increase alone pushed Denver from 16th to 13th, and that pushed Orange County down a bit. A lot to be learned from all of this. What's going on, and what can we do in Orange County to stabilize that? Where are these losses taking place? Is it in innovation, establishments, jobs, wages? We can assess that. You're the first to see this, but there's a lot of grist here that economists, social scientists can examine in coordination with our community leaders, business leaders, to come up with findings that suggest strategies for the future. One of the things, just looking at Phoenix here, this is something that just came up recently, so I want to share this with you, because there's, especially you young people out here, there's a lot to be said for what are the areas growing in the economy. And here's what a good friend of mine told me. I was chewing the fat with my good friend Dave Wilson of Toyota of Orange, Newport Lexus, dealerships all over the country. And he was telling me a story. I called him to tell him about Phoenix because I know he started in Phoenix. He was born in Iowa on a farm, not a rich corporate farm. His parents had a small farm, no indoor plumbing. And when he was at a point in life thinking about what am I going to do the rest of my life? Am I going to stay here in Iowa and work the farm or do something differently? And get this, he's reading, the parade, the color section, your Sunday paper, the parade insert. He's reading that in Iowa. I guess there's not much more to do in Iowa. Sorry, don't call. No cards and letters from Iowa. I love the state, great state. But he's reading parade, and he comes upon a quote, and the quote states, "Go where the sun goes during the winter." Remember, go where the sun goes during the winter. I kind of followed that when I moved from Chicago to Orange County 45 years ago. Go where the sun goes during the winter. So he looked around, where are some warmer spots, and he found Phoenix. Housing prices seemed low. That was many years ago. We're talking about, 1980. He wasn't even a dealer, or didn't even sell cars up to that point. So he decides to move to Phoenix. Becomes a dealer, a car salesman, does extremely well as a salesman, kind of gets the ins and outs of running a dealership. But on weekends, he has nothing better to do than to ride his Harley all over the neighborhood. And every weekend on a Sunday, he'll take his motorcycle out. And he drove on the arterials. He found that Phoenix is funny in that they're kind of bounded by hills or watersheds. The only area where the development could take place is up north. So he would take his motorcycle and travel up whatever road it was up north. And he'd find that not too far, he'd find desert area. And he figured, areas like this will be developed. So he went to the county assessor's office, found out the owners, generally older people who didn't want to wait for the development to reach them, sold the land to Dave, and Dave did extremely well. Now, I relate that story because you could use a similar kind of strategy today because Phoenix hasn't been built out. I assume that maybe it's farther out in the desert, but development is obviously taking place in these rapidly growing areas. So go get a motorcycle and go out and see what's going on. But I have to tell you that in my case, my spouse, Lynn, never allowed me to have a motorcycle. I remember one year I was hoping for a Ducati motorcycle. That was a dream. I kept hinting. And Christmas comes and I get a Ducati luggage set, a set of Ducati luggage. So didn't get my motorcycle. But about 3 months ago, I have to share this with you. I buy an e-bike. And it looks very much like the original, like a Harley of old. You cycle it, but it has a nice little electric engine in it. And so, words to the wise, take it out and go to Phoenix, hitch it up, and see where that development is taking place. That's, following that advice is the way, really, literally, to a fortune. I have to say, it's been fun. When I ride this to school, to Chapman, I'm in the cycle. You can only go 30 miles an hour, but it's great. And I fantasize, I'm like Steve McQueen. Remember The Great Escape, the motion picture, The Great Escape? Remember, he's on that cycle and he's leaping over hills, fences, trying to evade the Nazis closer to. I picture I'm Steve McQueen in my cycle. I have a ball. Okay, with that, I think we're near the conclusion of this forecast. The best. This is like the Academy Award for Best Picture of the Year. This is the best response on student evaluation. Remember, this is a response. This was came in my econometrics class last spring, which was a Zoom. It's a virtual class, so you have to know that to understand what the student is referring to. But here it is. My cat recognizes your voice and comes to watch your lecture on Zoom every week. I think he loves you. Well, it's great to be loved, and I have to say this must be one tremendous cat. Before I end, here are some takeaways, reminders, if I lost your way. Number one, don't forget Chapman #1 in forecast accuracy over the long haul. Additional fiscal stimulus, kind of a CARES Act 2 that we're assuming of about $1 trillion, along with sharp increases in net household assets, namely household wealth, and high personal savings, kind of dry powder for the future spending on big ticket items will continue to fuel strong consumer spending in 2021. And that will be, since consumer spending accounts or comprises about 2/3 of all overall GDP, that's going to be all important in justifying and supporting our call and forecast for a strong recovery and a strong year economically in 2021. By year end, the level of real GDP will be almost 4% higher than pre-COVID-19 level. Not jobs, but spending, dollars spent. We can see that hopefully the COVID recession will be long behind us by the end of next year. Takeaways going on with relatively stricter COVID-19 governmental mandates. As I've discussed, it cost on the cost side 500,000 jobs, but on the benefit side, we believe strongly, given our statistical findings and the fact that there's strong statistical evidence for this, that 6,600 lives have been saved. Benefit and cost, measuring those, we'll have more to say in future presentations as we delve into it in more detail. But you heard it first here as a result of this forecast. Housing will be a major engine of growth for Orange County in 2021. Higher housing affordability, but most importantly, low mortgage rates, at least through most of next year, will lead to it being a major engine of growth. And payroll employment in the county is forecasted to increase 2.6% versus 2.5% in California. So we will be pretty much in parity with California next year, at least in terms of job growth. We unveiled our Chapman UCI Innovation Indicator. So in addition to the research we've been doing at the center relating to COVID, the impact on the economy, lives saved, in addition, we've created this Innovation Indicator, which we believe will be a critically important tool, especially in a strategic sense, to evaluating what we can do to position Orange County to support the kind of job growth in areas that will provide the highest value added in our county. In 2018, Orange County ranked 13th out of the 22 sectors or innovation hubs. But as a result of the negative things over the last couple of years, particularly 2019, Orange County dropped from 13 to 14. And that's a pretty big drop. It may not seem like much, but the decline over the last 2 years was enough to move this down. At the same time, don't forget, there are still opportunities for investment in Phoenix and Salt Lake City. It wasn't all Dave Wilson. You could still get your cycle and go out there and just go a little farther out and find opportunities for profitable investment. Goes to show you that no matter what time period we're in, there are always golden opportunities to do well and outperform the market. And this Chapman UCI indicator is giving you a kind of a measurement tool to assess where you should be focusing your own attention. So with that, we're at the time where I'm going to queue up the bowl that's going to be the Doty bowl that's going to be going out for auction this time. Remember, we sold the bowl back at the update forecast to Dave Wilson, my good friend. In fact, it was a bid of $10,000 for this Doty bowl. Turns out Dave collects wood bowls. His wife Holly told me recently, by the way, that he put your bowl in a very nice position in his collection. But what he really seems to like most of all is his Ginsu knives that went with the deal, because he said Dave's slicing and dicing every night. I received a lot of input after the bowl went up for auction that said, where do you get these bowls? They didn't realize, people didn't realize, I make these bowls. I guess they must have thought I had some scam going where I buy the bowls online, resell them at a higher price at auction, and make a nice little return on the turnaround. No, I make, these are bowls made. Here's my lathe. Here I am working in my shop here in my little man cave, making a bowl here. Here is the man cave exterior shot. And here I am making, this is a walnut bowl. This is a maple bowl. And this is the kind of mask I have to wear because there's a lot of dust. You can imagine, though, it's a great mask. So when COVID hit, when I go into grocery stores, you can see that I create quite a stir when as I enter with that. Okay, what do we have this year? This is truly special. Now, I know you know about we talked about the governor's hyperbole. You may accuse me of the same, but I get excited about this. This is truly an amazing bowl. First of all, I only make normal curve bowls for auction for the forecast because a normal curve is the mantra, is the underpinning of statistics, econometrics, quantitative methods, data analysis. It all goes back to the normal. It's like the supply and demand curve in economics. You can only get these at auction only for forecast auctions. So first of all, it's a normal curve. Dave Wilson's bowl that he bid $10,000 was a normal curve. Now, it stands up on its own, by the way, and you can see it. But here's what's special. This is made out of Koori wood. It comes out of New Zealand. That's been carbon dated at 30 to 50,000 years old. They get them out of there. They found these old trees in bogs where there's no oxygen, so no decay, and this very special wood comes out of it. So when I cut into this, and sometimes I see a little wormhole. That worm lived like 30 to 50, probably an extinct worm. I don't know. But when I look at the lines, the tree lines, just think each of those represent, I don't know, maybe 42,001 BC to 42,000 BC. And you can see that. And the other thing, you don't see it on the screen, but it's almost transparent and it kind of has an iridescent look. Very expensive wood. And if you buy this, you not only get the Ginsu knives, but in addition, you get a copy of the certificate of authenticity. Ancient Koori wood, carbon dated 30 to 50,000 years old. Just think, whatever you bid on it, what's money? This is wood that is priceless. Very expensive, by the way. And prehistoric Koori timber, and signed, sealed. So here it is. And to bid on it during the Q&A, as we conclude, we're going to open the bidding. I understand there's already a bid at $5,000, so don't even get online unless you are willing to spend more, but it's at least worth that. And all goes to the Chapman Scholarship Fund. And don't forget, along with that, you get the Ginzu knife set. So you could be slicing and dicing as well. To put in your bid, just go to the Ask a Question box online and then put in your bid and the other information. And I hope you'll be successful. With that, let me again just thank all of our sponsors, especially our title sponsor, Bank of America. But let me say it again, they're deserving. Edwards Life Sciences, thanks, Mike. All of our gold sponsors, the Ardress family, C&L Refrigeration, Christine and Bradley Comp, the Muscos, Mary Bell and Paul. I'm hoping that next June we'll have that update forecast at the Musco Center. That's something that we can all hope for. Schools First doing a great job. The bronze sponsors, First American, Orco Block, Whittier Trust. Next month we're going to have an Orco forecast and BIA forecast for the Inland Empire. But I'm very proud to also say that I'm privileged to be on the board of directors of both First American and Whittier Trust. And of course, I want to thank OCBJ, great work that's being done there, getting business information out there, and also the Orange County Register. And with that, we're going to adjourn and open up to Q&A and the Doty Bowl auction. I'll see you then. And I will be joined by my colleagues, Fidel Lawandi and Ramon Sphere. Welcome back, everyone, to this Q&A session, and thanks for sticking with us. I'm joined here by Ramon Sphere, who's director of the Center for A. Gary Anderson Center for Economic Research at Chapman, and Fidel Lawandi, who is the director of the C. Larry Hogue Center for Real Estate. And I'm the director of nothing. So we're going to try to get you guys out of here by 5, so let's get right into the thick of these questions. I've got a really terrific one from a very astute listener, or someone who's been following our forecast. And the question is, the mandate score that I presented is comprised of 7 factors. Together, those have been calculated to have saved 6,600 lives. That's the question. So, yes, you're absolutely right. Here's the question. Can you calculate how much each of these individual factors has contributed to the number of lives saved? Fantastic question. I wish whoever wrote this question can join our research team, because yesterday I have an email out to Oxford University to see if they can give me those scores. Right now it's only a collective score, but it would be wonderful if we could get the individual scores, because then we can measure the efficacy of each one. So stay tuned, and we will have more sessions on this as we begin to publish the second research study sometime in January. Okay, there's a great question here on real estate, and it is, let me see here. What is the outlook for real estate investment in the rental sector this year, and what about a longer term 5-year horizon? There's concern that with people moving out of the state, that may negatively affect rental housing. I'm going to begin with you because, Ramon, you just told me that population data came in today, yes, hot off the press, yes, and it's not good. You want to relate what that is?
Yeah. As of July 1, 2020, the population in California was just 21,000 people more than July 1, 2019. That's 1/2 of 0.1%. So it's just 0.05% increase. Unfortunately, in Orange County, it's even worse because the population actually went down by 4,400 people. So this is something that we have to come to grips with in the long run. If the population in California and Orange County stop growing, and its impact not only on housing prices and rents, but also on employment as well.
And you're on the investment side. Would you invest in rental housing now?
In rental housing, I would hold off. I think that the market has been hot when it comes to multifamily, when it comes to rental housing. It seems like that's where the movement has been towards as it relates to investment real estate type. While it's attractive to buy today because interest rates are low, you're able to leverage the transactions. To Ramon's point, if we're seeing that the population on the long run is shrinking and it's the younger crowd that is leaving, that doesn't bode well for the rental property on the long run.
And on the single family side, I would have to say that this year is definitely a good year to invest because mortgage rates are low and they're not going to be low forever. When you can get a 30-year mortgage in the 3% range, go for it. Is a recording of this presentation available? I assume you're asking that question because you want something to aid in your sleep at night. But yes, it is available. Recordings will be sent out via email to all the attendees. Will high taxes in California or migration by high-income people out of the state affect growth in the future of our state? Yeah, in fact, this was another year of 200,000 more people moving out than moving in. Our Chapman UCI indicator series suggests that a good chunk of those people are in the higher income, not simply low value-added jobs moving out or lower income households, but higher. And it's something that we have to grapple with. And the state government and the governor needs to provide the kind of leadership that will make California a more attractive place as a magnet to bring in jobs and establishments. And we're going to be tracking it here at Chapman and UCI to gauge how well we're doing.
We've just looked, and businesses are leaving as well. Tesla announced that they're leaving California, they're moving to Texas. There's a lot of businesses that are migrating because of the high taxes, and that will, individuals will follow these jobs, and it will have some form of a negative migration.
Yeah.
Let me qualify a little bit what was said, which is true. But at the same time, if one looks at the tax returns in California, the number and percent of tax return over $1 million in income has been increasing rather than decreasing. So a huge number of people who are very rich are leaving, but it looks like we are generating even more millionaires in California anyway. That's why we don't see that huge impact on taxes at this point in time.
So we make millionaires and export them.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Although I have to tell you, a lot of my buddies in the higher income area are looking at Vegas, Reno, Utah, low income areas, and the savings on state taxes are incredible. Just spoke with someone who told me this person is saving $7,000 a day as a result of living in Nevada, and his neighbor is saving $75,000 a day. That's what we need to deal with here, and those are some of the structural issues that need leadership at the state level. This is one for you, Fidel, and again, a very astute listener. In Obama's second term, Republicans took control of the Senate while Democrats retained control of the House. So this was DRD. Why does Fidel's overview claim this has never happened before?
I will respectfully disagree. So the 112th and the 113th Congress, which was Obama's second term, the House was held by Republicans, the Senate was held by Democrats. So it was actually DDR in both Congress, the 112th and 113th. can be verified independently as well. You don't have to take my word for it.
Great, great, terrific. This is directed to me. President Emeritus Doty, how will the skyrocketing debt impact our economy, either from a dollar value standpoint or inflation? One of the nice things about being President Emeritus is I can deflect that question to someone else. So, Ramon, what do you think?
The impact on the economy, whenever the government spends more money, then total expenditures is higher by government, business, consumers, because that's what real GDP is. It's the value of everything that we produce. So yes, if the government spends more money, the debt is going to be higher. But when we produce more products, then GDP is higher, and the real value, real GDP, is also higher. Employment, as a result, will increase in order to produce all these products. So in the short term, there is obviously a positive impact of increasing government expenditures. In the long term, it may cause inflation, but so far we have not really seen it.
How does this deficit go back down? It's 4 to 5 times what it was, and wealth has increased exponentially, but more than ever, more people are struggling. Who pays this money back? Well, as a septuagenarian, it's not going to be me. It's going to be the next generation, and that's a pity. But I want to clarify, what we need to look at is not the level of the deficit, but the deficit as a share of GDP. As long as GDP can increase as much as the debt, that increases our ability to fund that deficit. The problem now is the deficit is increasing faster. But this happened in World War II. The debt went way up. The economy expanded considerably in the late 40s, especially the 50s, and the percentage went down substantially. One can hope that that will happen again. But that's what to look for. Look at not the level, but the share of debt. Are you surprised at how strong the U.S. stock market is performing? I'll answer that right away. No, not with the EP ratio being so high as compared to interest rates and the 10-year bond rate. Do you foresee the market performing even stronger during the Biden administration? Well, I took the easy one. I'll let Fidel take the tough second part of that question.
Well, like we mentioned in the economic forecast, if the Senate does flip on January 5th, and we end up with a across the board Democratic White House, Senate, and House of Representatives, historically we've seen the markets average about little south of 9%. But if we end up with a Democrat in the White House, which we have, a House of Representatives that is Democrat, most likely it's going to stay the same. But we haven't had that historically before, so that we have a historical trend to it. Having said that, given our economic forecast and where we believe where GDP is going to be and the recovery in 2021, most likely the markets are going to continue to be strong. It might not rally as much as we've seen in the last few months, but we'll definitely see a strong market in 2021. At least for the first 6 months. If they want the second 6 months, they have to come back and watch the update.
Okay. This is an interesting one, and I'm glad I got it so I can correct it. I've read that some private universities might have to close due to financial reasons from the COVID crisis. I can't validate the source, but someone told me he thought that he had read that Chapman was on the list. That's worrisome. We may not have jobs here. I have a close relationship with Daniele Stroop, who's doing a fantastic job as our president. We're on a forward trajectory, and quite frankly, of all the schools, the private schools and higher education, we are doing exceptionally well. If any institution will ride this out, it's going to be Chapman. And what we've done in the face of the COVID crisis in terms of having to respond to this challenge in changing the way we teach our classes, I have to applaud our staff, our faculty, our administration, because I really think in many respects our students are getting as excellent an education as they did pre-COVID. We've learned a lot too, and I think what we've learned will make the Chapman personalized education model even more effective in the future when COVID becomes a distant memory. But nothing to worry about with respect to Chapman. We're doing very well, and the leadership is getting us through this storm. When do you think tourism will return to Orange County, specifically Disneyland, and how long after reopening will attendance return to pre-pandemic levels? Well, I think it really will depend on the effectiveness of vaccines, but from what we can see, we think things will be back this summer. Not fully back. Remember the forecast, by the end of 2021, we see leisure and hospitality jobs only about 5% lower than what the highest level was pre-COVID. So there's going to be a lot of recovery that we see happening next year. I had another question here. Will the Biden presidency really improve the government's response to the COVID epidemic, and will we be seeing, as a result of that leadership, lower death rates? It's not going to come from a Biden presidency. Hopefully that will help, but much more important will be the fact that a vaccine is available. And we have found in our studies that people are using more self-protection. They are self-administering distance, stringency. In the early days, they weren't. But as the crisis deepened, as people became more familiar with the dangers of COVID and the high transmission rates, the free market, people themselves began to self-administer protective measures, distancing, wearing masks, and that actually improved the effectiveness of the government mandates. So we think, we're highly confident that we're going to see 2021 being the turnaround year, and by year end, really, we're quite confident COVID-19 will be a distant memory. But the major reason for that optimism is the effectiveness of the vaccines.
But if I may add to that, the question is not whether a Biden administration would make this a successful endeavor. It's really Congress and Congress being able to allocate the funds to deploy the vaccine. In developing the vaccine, the government put a lot of money behind the development, but in deployment, they've only put up about 2% of what they spent on helping get in a vaccine into the market in deploying it. So I think Congress needs to kind of allocate more funding to get the vaccines into more arms faster,
Jim.
and I think that will help.
Interesting question here about the governor's projection of a major, an exaggerated or hyperbole about the government deficit of $52 billion, taking two, exaggerating it. Was that a ploy on the part of the governor to get money from the federal government to bail us out? Any perspective on that? I think it's possible, right?
It's possible, but I mean, someone like the government would look really ridiculous when the number is so exaggerated. I mean, you can make it a little bit more or a little bit less, but the number is so different than reality that he doesn't look good having said that.
What about the potential for tax increases from Biden? I might tell you that we did, Fidel and I, we worked on what would happen if the corporate income tax goes from right now, I think the effective rate is around 21%. 21% to, he's talking about 27 or 28%. Whether he can get that if there's an RD, RD, Republican Senate, Democratic House is another story. But we did a test on that, and do you remember what it was? I can tell you. We looked at what would happen to the EP ratio, which is now about 3. We found that it would reduce that ratio by 0.5%. So from 3, it would go to 2.5, which is still safely above the 10-year rate.
Still healthy.
Right. So that was the answer to that question. By the way, we have about a few minutes left, but I understand the bid for the Doty Bowl was $10,000 now. Wow.
Congratulations.
I'm sure it's not for the Doty Bowl. It must be for those Ginsu knives. That has to explain it. Mentioned early in the presentation expected pressure on inflation. We don't see inflation now, but when that pressure occurs, what will be the impact on interest rates? That's the big question. And I might alert our listeners, to those of you who want to see that article that's in the Chapman Economic and Business Review, you see it on the table right in front of us. Just go online and information will be there as to how to get the review that has all of the detailed forecasts, all of the tables at the state, federal, and local level. And in there is an article that relates to the potential for inflation and what its impact. In a nutshell, here's the issue. We have another $1 trillion CARES Act. There will, in addition to that $1 trillion, another $500 billion increase to the deficit simply because we're spending more than we're taking in. If you take that in addition to the $3 to $4 trillion of additional debt last year, this year, early in 2020, that deficit is building up. But what will happen when there's a turnaround in the economy and we get this significant increase in spending, perhaps in the summer, not unlike what happened at World War II, that will possibly lead to demand pull inflation. The increase in spending will be greater than the ability for businesses to respond. Prices will go up, and that's where you get the increase in interest rates and the end to these beautiful low mortgage rates, beautiful to those people who are buying housing. And that's when the game changes. And that potential is there, but that's why I urge you to tune in to the update conference in June, because by then we'll know how effective the vaccine is, how it's affecting COVID infection, death rates, and we'll also begin to see, as the economy picks up steam early next year and track what's happening to inflation, then we'll have a much better handle on answering that very, very important question.
May I add something? Yesterday, the Federal Reserve published a document as to their policy on monetary policy and interest rates in the coming month. They confirmed that they're going to continue to buy a large amount of securities. That is, they will continue to buy $80 billion of Treasury securities per month and $40 billion in mortgage-backed securities every month for a total of $120 billion. So if they continue to do that, in the coming few months and most likely next year, it means that interest rates, long-term interest rates, as well as mortgage rate, are going to continue to be on the low side. They also said that they're going to keep the short-term interest rate at 0.1%, which is the current rate, and that may stay the same, not only in 2021, but possibly in 2022 and 2023.
But if inflation, Ramon, goes up from, let's say, 1.8% to, let's say, 3.5%, I'm fairly confident the Federal Reserve will change its tune.
Definitely.
So that commitment is very much based on what's going to happen to inflation. I'm going to leave it. This is the last question, but it's a great question to end this on, because many people may not know the answer to this question, and Ramon, I think you'll be the best one to answer this because you're really, as director of the center, right on top of this. The question is, how often and when do you do economic forecasts? Who collects the data? A private third party or Chapman students and staff? What kind of formula is that you use to predict election results, and how many variables go into the formula? a lot of stuff there. But give a in a nutshell all of the work that's done, especially by our staff.
We have staff people who their main job is to really collect data from government agencies such as the Bureau of Labor Statistics and Census Bureau and other agencies. They also collect data from private organizations and institutions. And they put all of that data together for Jim and me with the help of the students. They also help us collecting the data. They help us also run our regressions and our models. So we put that together twice a year for the December forecast as well as for the June update.
And we have ongoing research on a number of different projects where we keep up the Consumer Confidence Index, Purchasing Managers Index, now this Chapman UCI Innovation Indicator. So we're busy throughout the year bringing data together. But I want to thank our viewing audience and those people who've supported the forecast for years and years for tuning in. It means a great deal to us. It's very gratifying to our students. I know my stats students, econometric students, they're wowed when they find that so many distinguished business leaders, community leaders tune in and care and are interested in the work that's being done by the A. Gary Anderson Center for Economic Research here at Chapman. Before I end, I believe it's $10,000. Do we know who it is? Pardon me?
Glass?
We're going to have to write it down. We're maintaining such safe distances here. I think we need a megaphone to communicate. Oh, Jim Burra. Wow, our great friend.
Was from our Board of Trustees.
Yeah, board member Jim Burra. Jim, well, thank you, and I hope tonight you'll be doing some slicing and dicing. And thanks very much for your support. Thank you all, and hope you'll join us in June for our update forecast.
Thank you.